is very important, to understand. This is one of the ways that Satan tries to beautify corruption by giving a good end to it. So it seems, it's worth making that sacrifice, for the sake of that good end. So music, and this is, as I said, people tend to be so attached to it, it's very difficult to explain and convince people why they should give up music. Because it has such a powerful impact that once it enters into the heart, it's like never goes away. It's just there. So even as an adult, way down the line, if you hear 2 or 3 bars from any song which you used to love when you were a little kid, young, some years back, when you're much younger, all you need to hear is about 2 or 3 notes from it, the whole song comes back to your head. You're back there again. The whole thing. Because it attaches itself into the heart. That is the nature. That is why the Prophet ﷺ forbade it, because it has that capacity to occupy the heart. And of course, the more of the heart that is occupied by it, the less room there is for guidance. So this is why scholars like Ibn al-Qayyim refer to music as the Quran of Satan, the satanic Quran. Instead of having the Quran of Allah there, you put the Quran of Satan, then it blocks out, it doesn't give room now for the Quran of Allah to enter into the heart. And of course, when we talk about singing, there are points of clarification here where certain elements of it are allowed. We don't say music and singing are prohibited in Islam, but most forms of music and singing are. There are some forms which are acceptable. In the case of females, it is those who are below puberty. In the case of males, whether they're kids or they're adults, it's permissible, but on condition that what they're singing about is halal, right? And that the singing is not accompanied by musical instruments, which are themselves forbidden. These are the condition. And of course, that permission was given from the practice of the Prophet ﷺ, and because music existed, people did sing together, more folk type songs, where people do it naturally, they make it up, in times of harvest when people are working together, it gives sort of added strength, when you're working together, you're harvesting. When they were digging the trench, to defend Medina against the pagans who were coming from Mecca, they sang certain songs together. They call them in Arabic anashid, right? So things of this nature are permissible, but where it becomes now purely a form of entertainment, then the danger of the line being overstepped becomes great. So you find now, today, the practice of anashid, using anashid, coming into many of the big conferences. You have anashid artists who are brought in from different parts of the world. And, the situations in these concerts will become really concerts have become, worse and worse. When I was there in the UK just a little while back, people were describing a particular concert which they had, which was held by one of the groups there in London. And, they brought these artists in, they were singing, and the girls, actually it was more so from the females than the males, they were standing on the chairs and they were swaying, and doing this, like what you see in pop concerts, and they were even taking off their hijabs and throwing it at the stage, for Sami Yusuf, that's where you end up. And really, when you look at it as an external observer, what's the difference? What's the difference? It's become the same thing, So, there is a danger in, although on one hand we say we want to find substitutes, which are halal. We replace one thing, we stop one thing, you try to put something in its place. But sometimes some of these other things they're so close to the haram that they end up becoming indistinguishable. So this is, I think, one of the trials of our times now, especially this generation of Muslims, where the anashid are bordering on out-and-out music. And of course, you do have some anashid artists who are playing with musical instruments, no ifs, ands, and buts. And of course, the musical instruments, we should, mention that wind and stringed instruments, these are the ones which Prophet ﷺ specifically prohibited. He did okay the use of drum-like instruments like the duff. So there was something which he made exception for in the musical instruments. The question which often arises is that you have some groups today that don't use any musical instruments, but with their voices, sounds from their mouths, they make sounds which sound just like guitars and bass and saxophone, and they've produced it with their mouths. So they say, we're not using any instruments, and they put out an album completely free of musical instruments. But you listening to it, you say, hey, it sounds like they're using them. How could it not? But it's all being produced by the voice. So now, what do you do with that? Is that okay? No? Why not?
Because it isn't.
Right. We have to consider the musical instruments, their prohibition was not merely for the instrument itself. Meaning that if you bought a guitar and you put it up on your wall, is it the guitar itself which is haram, or the sound which comes from the guitar? When the Prophet ﷺ prohibited musical instruments, it's for the sound. So it's not the instrument itself, Although it becomes included that you shouldn't keep it anyway, because that just becomes a temptation to produce it, right? But it is technically for the sound which it produces. So if you produce that sound by other means, by your voice, or by what they call synthesizers, they have electronic means of producing the same sounds, indistinguishable. You can't tell that this is not a guitar. It sounds just like a guitar. But it's done electronically, completely. There are no strings involved, or any wind. It sounds just like a flute, but it's not a flute. It's done completely electronically. So the point is that the ruling stands. It's still prohibited. Because as long as you produce the same sounds that were produced by those instruments, whatever means you use, it doesn't change the haram character of the sound itself. Right? So that's an important point that we should be conscious of. The next point which is mentioned in the book under singing and music is bells. Because Prophet ﷺ had said bells are the musical instruments of Satan, specifically mentioning bells. Right? And this is authentically narrated. And he also said angels do not accompany any people with whom there is a dog or a bell. Right? So traditionally, Muslims have avoided the use of the bell. And of course, when we talk about prohibited music, we have to include our mobile phones. Because this, of course, becomes even a big fitna. In the masjid, so many times we're in salah, and people's phones go off, and, they're playing jingle bells and, a variety of other things, things which are just totally, yeah? It's, so, that's bad enough as it is. But the use of the bell, this was, of course, the bell was the way by which the Christians announced their worship. As Muslims, we avoid imitating or being similar to their practices. So the bells have become, were prohibited by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. And unfortunately, we do have some bells being used, whether it is in alarm clocks, and a variety, the doorbell, a variety of different places where bells come in, but again, for one who seeks to protect his home from the impact and the effect of Satan, then he or she should strive to clean the home from all the bells, all bell sounds that are produced. The next point, which is point number 19, which focuses on negligence, where there are a variety of instructions which the Prophet ﷺ has given, and they were given for Muslims to follow them closely and not loosely. And that's why Allah said, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu udkhulu fis silmi kaffa. O you believe, enter completely into Islam. Meaning by obeying all of the rules and regulations of the Islamic religion. That one doesn't have one foot in and one foot out. Doing of Islam what is convenient, what is according to one's desires. Because when one practices Islam in that way, then in fact, you're not practicing Islam. Islam means submission. So if you're picking and choosing of Islam what pleases you, have you submitted? Where is the submission here? It's not. It's you doing your own thing. So this is the point where people, oftentimes don't realize that in negligence, in neglecting different aspects of Islam which are required of them, that in fact what they're doing is leaving a chunk or an important part of Islam. The very concept of submission becomes meaningless to them, because it becomes in fact their own version of Islam as opposed to a true Islam, which means submission to the will of Allah. So the example which is given in the book, where people are told to pray together. Imams tell the people to stand close together, shoulder to shoulder, feet to feet, not leaving spaces between them. Prophet ﷺ described the issue of spaces, saying, straighten your rows and do not let devils come in between you like the children of Hadaf. And when they were asked, Prophet ﷺ was asked, who are the children of Hadaf? He said, the locusts in the land of Yemen. So, he did stress the importance of not leaving any gaps. And, people use this gap business as a means of avoiding coming in contact with other Muslims. Our way of prayer requires everybody to stand beside everybody else. Meaning there's no distinction between people in terms of that line. But people, unfortunately, some people have made distinctions by not completing the line, by leaving gaps, not wanting to stand quite next to that person because he's a common laborer, and this other person is from white collar, upper crust or whatever. He doesn't want to stand next to the person. But that is really something evil, and that opens the gap and the place for the entrance of Satan. So that, and of course a variety of other instructions with regarding the deen, where people don't take them on in their entirety, then what they do is in fact weaken their practice and their understanding of Islam, through this form of negligence. And in the end, it can destroy one's Islam altogether. It can reach that state. For many people, maybe it doesn't destroy it in totality, but it turns the Islam that they have into just rituals. So they will be the first to tell you, Allah said, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The most noble among you are those who fear Allah the most. But at the same time, they will label people, in the society as being inferior, not on the same level as themselves, etc., because they belong to this group or the other group, or whatever, So, this is one of the means by which Satan plays on human weaknesses, the tendency or the desire to want to be lax, take things easy, that it becomes a means by which people's adherence to the religion becomes weakened. And then of course that tends to break down the community, break down the bonds that should hold that community together, right? And so you find things like tribalism and these other kinds of things becoming very dominant and prominent in Muslim communities, when really Islam is completely opposed to it. We'll take some questions now as we go towards the end of the class.
On the issue of music, when you give da'wah to somebody against intoxicants or against fornication, they tell you there are explicit verses in the Quran
Okay, brother's question that certain other things which have been prohibited are clearly identified in the Quran, like intoxicants and magic and fortune telling, etc. These are clearly, by clear text from the Quran, prohibiting it. Whereas in the case of music, we don't have any clear texts. Well, one of the companions was challenged concerning something similar, in that he had, I think it's Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he had made a ruling for people, told people that the wearing of wigs is prohibited. So this woman came to him and said, I've memorized the Quran. I've read it from beginning to end, and I've not found anywhere in the Quran wigs are forbidden. He said it's there, right? But she said, but I've read it from end to end. I couldn't find it anywhere. So he said to her, didn't you read the verse? Whatever the Prophet ﷺ gives you, take it. And whatever he has forbidden you, leave it. She had read that verse, but hadn't grasped the implication of the verse. So you see, you don't have to have the actual text of that thing prohibited in the Quran itself. It's enough that it is prohibited in authentic sunnah, and that is sufficient. And we can say from that it is prohibited in the Quran, or through the Quran.
But the thing that they use is usually there is the hadith where Rasulullah said there will come a time.
Their statement that you cannot put these three together requires evidence, simply because fornication and drinking of alcohol are major sins which have clear punishments in the hudud, in the Sharia, doesn't mean that simply because there is no specified punishment for music that you can't put them together. The Prophet ﷺ included musical instruments to show how serious it was, though the punishment may not be the same. It's just like when the Prophet ﷺ had said that the riba, the taking of interest, has over 70 branches, and that the simplest of the branches is equivalent to a man having sexual relation with his mother. Now, according to Sharia, if a man has sexual relation with his mother, the punishment is death. Incest, the punishment for incest is death. Okay? So, can you compare that punishment to the punishment to taking interest? There is no punishment prescribed in the Sharia for taking interest. There's none there. So does that mean simply because there is none, you can't put these two together? No, you can, because what the Prophet ﷺ is showing by putting the two together is that it's a metaphorical way of showing the severity, of that particular sin. That is the purpose behind it, though the punishment may not be the same.
About picking and choosing.
Okay, brother's question, for the person who picks and chooses of Islam what he finds convenient, is there no reward for him in what he does? Because he prays one time in a day, or once a week, or once a year, Still, he had a good intention and he went and prayed. Shouldn't he get some reward for it? Well, ultimately this is with Allah. Ultimately, it is with Allah. But what we do know is that the Prophet ﷺ said that one cannot come close to Allah, that is, earn the rewards which Allah has promised, unless he or she does what Allah has commanded. Now Allah didn't command that we pray once a week. What He commanded that we pray is 5 times a day. So under that understanding, to pray less than 5 times a day deliberately, one cannot come closer to Allah. One will not attain the reward from prayer. Because The prayer was to be established, not merely done. You see, Allah didn't just say, Sallu. He said, Aqimis Salah. Establish the prayer. So this is the difference between the two. So, although ultimate decision with regard to human beings' actions, etc., are with Allah, at least on a basic level, we can say that a person who does not do what Allah has commanded him to do will not get the reward of what He has commanded him to do. If he doesn't do what Allah commanded him to do, but he just does what he feels like doing, then the reward that he will get is not the one which Allah had prescribed for doing this act. And the person's intentions, become very suspect. Why does that person actually pray? And when you actually sit down and talk with the person, you may find that that person, in fact, has doubts about Allah. He or she has doubts about Allah. But as a precautionary step, just in case there is Allah, at least I can come and say, well, I did pray, Ramadan. So I have some good to present. So it's like a backup, But the real faith isn't there. They doubt really about Allah's existence. So once you're in that state, there's no reward. For sure, no reward. But even a person, who is only praying on occasion, we're not going to say, no point in praying at all. No. Because that's not going to help him to establish prayer. Right? That's not going to help him to establish prayer. I'm just talking about the principle, right? To understand where does that stand according to the Sharia. But for that person who is only praying once a week, then it's better to encourage him to say encouraging words than to discourage him by cancelling even the little that he does. For the Imam to come up in Jummah and say, all you people who only come and pray Jummah, don't come. Your prayer is not rewarded, there's no good for you, so don't come. Is that going to help them to establish prayer? No. That means that even Jummah, of course, maybe some of them want to hear that. No point. Right. Don't even bother to come for Jummah. Right? So, that's of no use or no benefit from a dawah perspective. What may be a fact of the Sharia is not necessarily something that you go and you promote in giving dawah. The dawah, you're using wisdom, trying to use what is going to attract people to practice the deen. Not things which are going to discourage them and drive them away. Further question? No? Inshallah, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika, nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.